Okay, everyone, I think we'll get started. Thanks for taking time to join us today. I'm so excited for our webinar. I think it's going to be an exciting and engaging event. With that, I do have a few housekeeping items before we get started. The first is we have a few upcoming webinars. We hope you'll mark your calendars and register on our website for. The next one in September on the IAD webinar series is making CTE classrooms more inclusive for LGBTQ+ students. So please mark your calendars and join that one on September 8th. And then we have an innovation webinar on September 1st. And we also have another IAD webinar in October, on October 5th. So make sure you join us, as these are all important and engaging topics. With that, I also wanted to mention that we do have an IAD mentorship program. The program is currently open for mentor applications. If you have interest in joining this program, please be sure to visit our website and submit an application today. With that, I am thrilled to introduce our presenter today, Dr. Roger Cleveland. He has been at the forefront of equity and inclusion for over a decade. He has facilitated the activities of high school diversity clubs, served as a diversity advisor, and is a moderator and presenter at over 85 various conferences promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion. Cleveland is widely sought for his expertise in such areas as cultural proficiency, instructional equity, implicit bias, closing achievement gaps, learning styles, transforming school culture, conducting cultural audits, and school improvement planning. He has led staff development events for many school districts, social service agencies, state educational agencies, and universities, and conducted training sessions addressing equity and cultural issues from Alaska to Mississippi. In academia, Dr. Cleveland has taught at Morehead State University, University of Kentucky, Middle Tennessee State University, and Eastern Kentucky University. He is currently a full professor in the School of Education at Kentucky State University and serves as the Director Center for Research in the Eradication of Educational Disparities. With that, we are so lucky to have Dr. Cleveland here today. We appreciate his time and expertise, and I will hand it over to you, Dr. Cleveland.
All right, thank you, Megan. I appreciate that. I'm going to share my screen, and we will get started. All right, so today we want to have a conversation around education equity in the classroom. And, you know, this is a webinar, so we'll have a limited interaction, but I would like for you all to use the chat anytime. I will pose a few questions for you. And if you have questions for me, we'll just use the chat box for our interaction. And I do want to be as interactive as possible. And so, as I said before, the conversation is about education equity in the classroom. So let's just show you what we're going to be discussing today. Our focus is going to be on education equity, equity literacy, and barriers to education equity. And so what do we mean by education equity? Why it's important to be equity literate? And then what are some barriers that keep schools and classrooms from being as equitable as possible? And so that's the conversation today. I always believe in having context before content. And most educators realize that students connect what they don't know to what they do know. And so giving students context and what career and technical education, you all educators have a good understanding of that. Students are ready to interact in your classrooms because they know it's going to be relevant up to their interests and real life experiences. And so you all automatically get that just by where you teach and who you teach. So context is really important. So I want to show you a couple of quotes, and you can just put in the chat your thoughts. There's no right or wrong answers, just your interpretation of the quote. And so just to give us some context about the conversation today. So here's the first one. The child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. The child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. So I'd like for you all just, throw in the chat, what do you think that quote is saying to you? Yes, and Megan, so make sure you select everyone when you send the chat. So real quickly, just some thoughts about this particular quote. If you'd like to chime in. All right, sense of belonging. They are lost without directions. Belonging is a basic need. Students have to feel included. Exactly. Let's see some more information about attention. Everyone needs to feel love, some acceptance. Keep putting them in there. That's fine. One of the things that I hear quite a bit, matter of fact, this morning I'm in Louisville, Kentucky, and had a conversation with some educators today at a middle school. We were talking about this exact quote, and many of the people in the session were talking about some of the things you are talking about, being included, a sense of belonging. Students would do a lot of different things to get attention. And one of the things I said is that is very true, that students will do positive or negative things to get attention. But I think that's just part of it, is the attention piece, but it's also on their way to get a connection, not only attention, but also to make that connection. So if I can connect, if I can get Ramona Foster's attention, then possibly I can make a connection with her, if that's a void or a gap that I have in school. So it's not only just getting attention, but it's also making that connection. Many of us talk about building relationships with students, right? Which is really important. What I've been saying lately is telling educators not only build relationships, but we need to build informed relationships. And what I mean by that is that I continue to pick on Ramona. Ramona has connected with a number of students. She has great relationships with those students. Informed relationships takes that information she's getting from those students and that experience from that connection with those students, and that should inform your practice and your interaction with students to be able to serve them better. So not only are you cool with them, but you also use that information you're getting from them and that experiences to inform your practice to not only connect with students, but also serve them better. So let's develop not only relationships, but informed relationships, and just take it a step further. So the next one, get your thoughts on this one. When someone with the authority of an educator or practitioner describes the world and you're not in it, there's a moment of psychic disequilibrium as you look into a mirror and saw nothing. What do you think Agent Rich is trying to tell us now? What is she saying in this quote in the context of teaching and learning? I'll just use the chat box and please share. All right. And you see that in a lot of coaching, all right? If I don't see it, I can't be it. There's no connection. They don't matter. Why? There's a book written by Ralph Ellison called The Invisible Man. And in the book, he says that I'm only invisible because people refuse to see me. And if students don't see themselves in the curriculum, the content, the instruction, then it may convey a message to them that this whole school thing is not for me. And so at my current university, I was doing a session like this, similar session. And I used this quote, and one of my colleagues, another professor, basically said, well, he's like, well, Roger, this is important. Students see themselves in the curriculum, so that, but it's not the most important thing. And I said, well, I didn't say it was the most important thing. It's not the panacea, but it is important that students see themselves in the classroom and see themselves in the curriculum. He said, I guess. And I said, well, let me put it this way. You have a son and I have a son. And when they walk into the classroom, your son's culture is part of the curriculum, and my son's culture is an elective. That's what I mean by that. He's like, oh, I never thought about it that way. And I said, you don't have to. That's the point. Now he gets it now, and he's telling everybody why that's important. But sometimes you got to just put it where people can get it. And does that make sense to you all? That some students' culture is part of the curriculum, and some students' culture is an elective. And also some of you see themselves in the industry also. All right, so I just wanted to use those two quotes to kind of get us thinking about the conversation we're going to have today. So let's push forward. All right, we can, whenever and wherever we choose, successfully teach all children whose schooling is of interest to us. We already know more than we need to do that. Whether or not we do it must finally depend on how we feel about the fact that we haven't so far. This was a quote by who we call the father of effective schools, Ron Edmonds, when he was teaching at Harvard University. You know, we can dissect this quote in a number of different ways, but the most interesting part about this quote is that he said this in 1979. He said, we have everything we need to do to teach all children. And he basically said that we have it, but how do we feel about the fact that we're not teaching all children at high levels? And this is in 1979. This quote comes to me, across to me, is just two things, really. It's about will and skill. And the skill part, we can be taught how to teach, but the will part is something that you need to bring to the table when you're going into schools. You got to be willing to sacrifice, willing to assess yourself, self-reflection, things of that nature. So I always thought this was an interesting quote. All right, education equity. What were we talking about? I've been using this basic definition for a while for a number of reasons. Education equity is the provision of personalized resources, instruction, and academic support needed for all individuals to reach common goals. In other words, the goals and expectations are the same for all students, but the supports needed to achieve those goals depends on the student's needs. And so if you notice in the definition, I did not necessarily implement and add identifiers such as race, gender, gender identity, social economic status, all those different things. But they're all important. And the reason I'll initially include them is because if I go to a rural area in Montana and we're talking about education equity and we're talking about race, well, because they may not be ethnically diverse, the assumption is that they don't have any equity issues, and that's not the case. All right, and so it captures all students and meeting all students' needs, but I'll let your data, achievement data, attendance data, discipline data, identify your inequities, right? And so whether you need to focus on gender, race, socioeconomic status, or whatever, or all, let your data inform you that. So I go to a deeper level around defining equity after this initial and doing that. And so, like I said, if where I live in Lexington, Kentucky, we have a majority school district. 52% of our students are of color. Race is a factor in achievement data, discipline data, things of that nature. So we do talk about racial equity quite a bit. But we also have issues around socioeconomic status, gender identity, all those different things. But one thing we can all agree on, that regardless who the students are, where they come from, what they look like, they should have everything they need to be successful in school. And what you look like and what your zip code is should not be a determinant in how well you do in school. And so Somebody says, why do some students need more resources than others? Well, I think this next quote will help that out. Let me see if I can address that, and then we'll talk a little bit more about that. Unless somebody wants to go ahead and jump in, but I want to show this quote. And I was one of those students who needed more, and more doesn't necessarily means money, right? So let's look at this quote. Not a quote, but yes. Equity isn't handing a kid a laptop. It's knowing the systemic conditions that led to the lack of the laptop and working to mitigate them. And so this is you're like, well, we're giving them resources. So when the pandemic hit, everyone in our district who needed a laptop and who needed Wi-Fi or a hotspot received that. And so what the pandemic did was expose that a lot of students were going home to do homework and things like that and didn't have the lights or a place to do their homework. And especially when we went virtual, students did not have a laptop. That's a resource, right? That's a device that you need to do your work. And so to make the playing field level, those students that have had devices were fine. Those who need it received that. But that's only one part. The other part is that the systemic conditions or other conditions that even if they did have a device, there are other issues going on, possibly in a home and things of that nature, which is not necessarily the school's primary responsibility. Regardless whose responsibility is, there's still systemic conditions that keep some students needing more than others. And so that's why some students need resources, just like Title I and other federal programs. Every school does not receive the same amount of money with Title I. It's based on the needs of the school. So it goes beyond just money. I'm doing it. We have all this ESSER money right now, right, from the feds. And I used to be over Title I federal programs for the state of Kentucky. And people used to scream, districts would scream about more money, more money. And then I would get these emails and letters and people trying to figure out how they're going to spend $250,000 the last 6 weeks of school because the money they asked for at the beginning, they can't even spend. So resources in a number of different ways, just not money. And it could be students, it could be in a learning environment, all those different things that you all are mentioning. So one way to explain and help people understand equity, and I've been using this analogy for a while since the pandemic. And I used it in a different way before the pandemic, but I've been using this one for the pandemic. So imagine all of us are in a storm, right? And we're all in the ocean, and we're in the midst of this storm. And the storm is made up of COVID-19, social injustices, economic strain, and trauma. So that's the storm. And we're all in this ocean, but we are situated differently in this ocean. So even though we're all in the ocean in the storm, we're all situated differently. And some people are in different places. So Megan is in the midst of the storm. She's in the ocean with all of us, and she's in a large ocean liner. So she's feeling the storm, right? But Shelly, she's also in the midst of the storm, but she's feeling a little differently because she's in a yacht. So she's feeling a little bit more. Tiffany's really feeling it because she's in the middle of the ocean in a rowboat. Shelly's feeling it because she's in a life raft. And Elizabeth is on a life preserver. So even though we're all in the same storm, we are situated differently. And nothing else, the pandemic exposed all the inequities that we have in society and in our schools. And so you can't use universal strategies to meet individual students' needs. Does this analogy make sense? Someone help me out. Does that analogy make sense? All right. And so keep in mind that we can't assume that everybody needs the exact same thing, right? And so I ask you to, when we get off the webinar, the next time you see some of your colleagues, share this analogy to help some people, because some people still think that when we talk about equity, we're talking about equal, and that's not the case, right? That's not the case. All right, we're gonna push on. Teaching for equity. Equitable instruction honors students' strengths and identities while ensuring each student has access to the content, mindsets, and social and emotional cognitive skills they need to succeed and thrive in college, career, and life. Teachers committed to teaching for equity believe in the power of their practice to disrupt inequities, transform students' experiences and outcomes, and create more and just and joyful world. And so we're teaching for equity, whether it's the content, how we set up the classroom. Really, we're talking about equity pedagogy. And pedagogy doesn't just mean how you teach. It also means that not only how you teach, but also the content you use, how you use that content, how you set up the classroom, how you interact with students. All that is equity and equity pedagogy. It's just not the instructional part. So let's talk about equity literacy. Equity literacy. Equity literacy is comprised of the skills and dispositions that enable educators to recognize, respond to, and redress conditions that deny some students access to educational opportunities enjoyed by their peers. And the key part is this, is that schools have to be able to recognize these inequities, whether they start at school or not. That's not the issue. We know majority of those inequities many times start outside of school. But the one thing we want to make sure is that we're not complicit in increasing those inequities as educators. And so we have to be able to recognize inequities, respond to them in an accurate way, in an effective way, and try to eradicate those conditions for those students. And remember, when we're talking about equity, we're talking about all students, not one particular group of students, not poor students, not this group of students, all students. Okay. Equity literate educators. Equity literate educators recognize and draw upon the resilience of other funds of knowledge. I just want to pause there for resiliency. Over the last 15, 16 months, we realized that our students are very resilient, right? You know, I always talk about how, you know, sometimes how soft my own children are. You know, you start telling those war stories of how you grew up, and I grew up extremely poor, I really did, unlike my children. And so I was like, you all could have made it, you know, had to do this, you had to do that. But now, you know, during the pandemic, I had to second guess that, because our students were really resilient, right? And we're talking about all students. And so some students struggle because of poverty and things of that nature, or struggle for other reasons. And even affluent students had those experiences also, because some students, different groups of students, had issues around social isolation, right? Which can cause trauma also, or secondary trauma. So it just wasn't poor children who experienced some trauma and things of that nature. It wasn't only poor students who showed resiliency. Just because you have money doesn't necessarily mean you don't have any other issues, right? And so equity literate educators understand students' resiliency and their funds of knowledge. But in this case, in funds of knowledge, for whatever reason, I get to go around the country quite a bit when I go to schools that, you know, we have school children from high poverty areas. We tend to focus on the deficits of what students have, and not the knowledge, the funds of knowledge that they bring to school. And regardless where students live, what they look like, they bring funds of knowledge to school. And funds of knowledge is what students learn from home, their community, and other places they bring to school. And what good educators do is connect what students don't know to what they do know. and focus it, approach it from a difference orientation, difference of knowledge, but they have knowledge, versus a deficit orientation that they have no knowledge when they come to school. They're not empty slates. And so the last part is really important, that we reject deficit views that focus on fixing disenfranchised students. Our students are not broke. Well, our focus should be rather than fixing the things that disenfranchise those students. That's equity literate educators. All right. I'm just strolling through your, oh, I like this. Elizabeth says, my adult multiple language users have so much unrecognized, saying critical thinking skills, immigrants, parents working. How many things did they have to accomplish even to enroll in the nursing program? Great example, Elizabeth, right? Great example. All right, let's push on. Good stuff. Equity mindedness. Equity mindedness is exactly what it is. It's a mindset about how you approach and understand equity. The term equity mindedness refers to the perspective or mode of thinking exhibited by practitioners who call attention to patterns of inequity in student outcomes. We do a pretty good job of that, of examining and assessing non-cognitive and cognitive data. Both are important. We do that fairly well in schools. The second part is the part that I like to bring to your attention, which is these practitioners are willing to take personal and institutional responsibility for the success of their students. And this is the part that's really important, and critically reassess their own practices. It also requires that educators are conscious of the social and historical context of exclusionary practices in education. So equity mindedness is really what we say is a mindset. Equity mindedness is like building a culture within the school where all the adults understand the importance of equity and the importance of meeting the individual needs of our students, where it becomes equity mindedness, where it becomes part of the DNA of the school. It's just what we do. It's not an additive approach. It's not something extra. No, it is the work, okay? It's a mindset. So I would like your responses on this. I've been saying this for a long time. Equity is the process. Equality is the outcome. Please go in the chat and just give me your response. What do you think I mean by that? Equity is the process. Equality is the outcome. Share your thoughts about that. What do you think I mean by that? What do you think I mean by equity is the process, equality is the outcome? Okay. Is that Adriana? Adrian? Actual practice will lead to realization of these common goals for all students. Any other thoughts? Equity is the process, equality is the outcome. So let's use, I see Martha and I see Megan. Let's use Martha and Megan. Imagine, okay, so Martha and Megan, they start school, let's say kindergarten, all the way through the 12th grade. That's 13 years. If Martha receives an equitable education, that means she received everything she needed to be successful in school. And if she has skin in the game, she will have potential opportunities when she leaves school. If Megan receives an equal education and every now and then some equitable strategies, she may not be as prepared as Martha, because hers was hodgepodge every now and then, where every year that Martha was in school, she received what she needed. So when they leave the 12th grade, possibly Martha's more prepared than Megan, because the product is only good as the process. And so we want to make sure we create an equitable process for all students, an equitable process, an equitable environment in your classroom where we are providing opportunities for students giving students voice, giving students choice. Our interactions are fair and favorable to all students. Kind of things we're talking about, that process they go through. We have to be able to differentiate between schooling and education. Schooling is going to school for 13 years and acquiring knowledge. Education is going to school for 13 years and having the ability to apply that knowledge, right? It's like my son all the time. I tell him soap only works when you use it. If you know, I tell him as much as I want to. If you don't know how to apply that, okay, that's problematic. So knowledge is exactly intentional versus islands of excellence. Appreciate that, Don. And so we have to distinguish between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is knowing you don't put tomatoes in fruit salad, right? So that's being educated, knowing how to use that information once you go through these years of education. All right. So key understandings that you're going to share with your colleagues when you get back to school. Equity and equality are not the same, all right? Remember that Martha received an equitable education and Megan received an equal education. And there's a chance, possibly when they finish 12th grade, they'll be at different places in reference to preparing for life. Equity in school is about access, fairness, and addressing individual and systemic needs. And you don't sacrifice excellence to achieve equity. And we can't conflate equity with all these other issues that are out there right now. We've been talking about equity for years, and it's all about meeting the needs of students. And so I want to just keep that out there that, this issue around equity and cultural response and implicit bias and things of that nature. That's not a left issue. That's not a right issue. It's a student-centered issue. And so don't let our distractions keep us from educating our children. Focus on children, and you'll never have to apologize what you're doing, right? Or explain what you're doing. All right, so what are some barriers to education equity? The first one is implicit bias, and you all are very aware of what this is. Refers to attitudes and stereotypes that affect understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. Biases can be favorable and unfavorable and are activated involuntarily without our awareness or intentional control. So we all have biases. 3 things to remember about our implicit biases. 1, we all have them. 2, they mostly come from our lived experiences. And 3, they can be mitigated, right? So they can be lessened, but you're always going to have them to a certain degree around our biases. And our biases play out in schools and in different places and things of that nature. Our biases cause us to have feelings and attitudes about other people based on characters such as race, ethnicity, age, sexual orientation, appearance. There's IAT, the implicit association test that's out of Harvard that you can take. It's free. You can just put in IAT or implicit association test and Google it. It'll come up. It's free. You take the assessment. It could be about anything, gender, race, sexual orientation, whatever, and it gives you results back and tells you where you tend to have biases. And we're going to talk about some things to lessen our biases in a few minutes. Elizabeth says, I think English language learner is a bias. Multiple language user recognizes accomplishments. Exactly. Why is that a bias? Why do we perceive students who may not be fluent in English when they come to school as less intelligent and things of that nature? So those are biases that we have. Or I've seen where students have been placed in special education because they don't speak English when they first come to school, which those are 2 different issues, and those kinds of things. a language barrier, and then intellect, two different things. And so I've seen some of those things that Elizabeth is talking about as a bias. Once I said, we all have them, right? Doesn't make us sexist, racist, classist, does make us human. And it does help us to be able to recognize that sometimes, unbeknownst to ourselves, we may be treating one student unfairly versus another. But it's called implicit, which means it's subconscious. We're not aware of that. Explicit bias, you know exactly what you're doing. Those are two different issues. But most of the time in classrooms, it's implicit. So I want you to check out this video and get your response about, let me set it up, my best Jimmy Kimmel setup. In this video, it's a study from Yale University, and they invited 135 preschool teachers to do this research study and this experiment. And they told the teachers that on the other side of this two-way mirror is 4 preschool students. And one of the students is displaying disruptive behavior, or may display disruptive behavior. And every time you see that disruptive behavior, you just hit the enter button. So let's watch it and then we'll have a chat about it. No pun intended.
There's a new study out of the Yale Child Study Center that I had to read a few times just to believe what it was telling me. The researchers recruited about 135 preschool teachers. They had them watch video footage of 4 kids playing, a black boy, a black girl, a white boy, and a white girl. And they told the teachers, their subjects, watch the video, there may be some challenging behaviors. As soon as you see something that could become challenging, hit the enter key on your keypad. Well, here's the trick. There was no challenging behavior. The researchers were using eye scan technology to see which child the teachers were looking at the most. And what they found is that the teachers, both white and black alike, spent the most time watching the black boy, waiting for bad behavior that never came. There's one more really interesting headline in this study, which comes later. The teachers were also given a 1-paragraph description to read of a hypothetical child with a stereotypical name who behaves pretty badly in class, pushes, scratches, throws toys. And some of the teachers were also given some biographical information that helped make sense of that behavior. They were told that the child lives with his mother, father has been in and out for years, they're relatively poor, the mother is depressed, works 3 jobs. Researchers wanted to know if knowing this information made the teachers more empathetic to the kid. Well, here's the shock. It did, but only if the teacher and the child were of the same race. If the teacher and the child, a white teacher and a black child, or even a black teacher and a white child, knowing that biographical information, those teachers were less empathetic towards those students. And here's why this matters. Imagine if this is true, if there's this empathy deficit in preschool, well, imagine where else that's true.
All right. So in the chat,
there's a new study
thoughts about the video. What's your initial responses? And I chose this study because how we are biased about even universities and research, right? So I could have chosen a number of different universities, but since it's from Yale, then it has to be legit. So nobody would question that. Even that's our biases come out of that sometimes also. Thoughts about the video, your initial thoughts. Yes, you can get a clip. I'll send the clip to Megan. I'm gonna send the entire presentation to Megan also, so I'm sure they can upload it somewhere where you get access to it. Yeah, it is interesting, Don. 4 years old. All right, thanks, Tracy. Paula. And both, regardless of the ethnicity of the teachers, all the teachers were looking at the black boy. You don't know what you don't know. All right, so I was just looking at some of the chats. Please keep bringing them in because, you know, we're learning from each other. So as you put your perspective in the chat, we all can learn from each other. And so there's some strategies and things of that nature that they share in the research study that they offer up also. And so, all right, we'll push on so we can finish on time though. I'll get this to you all. So how does our biases impact the classroom? What's the implications for the classroom? Which is really important. So the curriculum, do all the students in your schools see themselves in the curriculum? We talked about discipline. So we have people in this webinar from all over the country, right? And I don't have to be, I've never been in your state possibly, or your school district, but I can almost tell you that when it comes to discipline and our biases, that if I'm in a suburban or even rural majority white school district, those kids who tend to be suspended, particularly for what we call discretionary or subjective infractions, meaning fail to follow directions, disrespect, insubordination, things like that. Those tend to be poor white boys who may or may not be in special education. And if I'm off, you all let me know. In an urban, failure to comply. In an urban district or suburban district that's fairly diverse, it tends to be African-American males, whether they're poor or not, or whether they're in special education or not. They are suspended for, like I said, subjective or discretionary reasons. Or you look at the total referrals, and it has 60% of the kids suspended in a category of other, right? But those affluent kids, usually white affluent kids, tend to be suspended for very objective, clear reasons: fights, drugs, weapons. And so we have to ask ourselves, are our biases seeping in and how we interact with our students as it relates to discipline? Because if students are not in the classroom, they're losing instruction. District or state assessments come back, and it's the same students who have been suspended, or the same ones occupying the basement of achievement. Now, and so we talked about biases are implicit. So it's not like Deanna's going to school purposely to get kids suspended, but she may do something implicitly that activates or trigger a certain behavior from a student where they do something where they end up getting suspended. So we do have to have those conversations about our bias. We all have them, right? Don't make us evil, but we do have to acknowledge our biases. And there's ways to mitigate those also, which we're going to talk about in a second. Our instruction, our rigor. If you have a certain bias or a perception of a student, then many times we may lower our expectations of them. And then our informed relationships can help with those biases also. All right, so here's a couple of things we can do. I'm not gonna go through all of these, but I do want to share a few of them. Some introspection. How often when we talk about if students are struggling in our classrooms, how often do we talk about it could be possibly my biases, my interaction with those students that could be causing the issue around achievement or discipline and things of that nature. Been mindful, right? Been mindful and tapping into our slow brain to pause and reflect about different situations before we respond, unless it's an emergency or something like that. We have to learn to slow down and use our slow brain sometimes versus our fast brain. And what I've been trying to do is try to get people to deal with students as individuals and let your data inform where your inequities are with groups. So as an individual, I'm gonna deal with Melanie Allen as an individual, okay? But also, if I see where a large group of our Hispanic males are struggling in science or tend to be suspended more, then I may look at that group as a whole, but I'm gonna deal with this one student who's Hispanic as an individual. I hope that makes sense. That keeps you from stereotyping and classifying people when it's not required. Okay. So of these 8, I would focus on introspection, mindfulness, tapping our slow brain, and then dealing with students and families as individuals. Right? Let me do that. Okay. All right, Ramona said it makes perfect sense. She's helped me out. So let's recap a little bit. Remember that equity is not equal. Okay. Equity is about all children. Let your data inform you. I didn't say drive, but inform you where your inequities are with groups. Okay. Just start with the basic understanding that equity is about meeting the needs of students, about fairness and access, and addressing systemic issues in our schools. We want to become equity literate educators and be able to recognize those inequities, tap into students' funds of knowledge to support them. And also that be aware of our biases. We all have them, right? We all have them. They come from our lived experiences. They can be mitigated. And we're always going to have them to some degree, but we also can lessen those biases by being mindful of those things. And also with the biases that, with implicit biases, that be more concerned about the impact on the students. Adrian, she said, those takeaways also, and I'll probably have to write those down, or I can add those when I send them to Megan. That be more concerned about the impact versus the intent, right? And so if Ramona is impacted by a teacher's bias, whether it's about academics, behavior, whatever it may be, well, I'm going to address Ramona's concerns first and how it's impacting her. Then I'll come back to Megan as a teacher and let her know what happened, and the intent. And like I said, it's usually implicit, but we still have to address that, but be more concerned about the impact first, not the intent. Also, don't forget around equity, the analogy I used, that we're all in this storm together, but we're situated differently. And so something that may help Ramona may not help Elizabeth. And so we can't use universal strategies for different situations in the classroom. So with that said, I would like for you all to help me out so I can check for understanding, make sure some of this made sense. So we have some takeaways, and I'd like for you to pick any one of these and finish the sentence based on our conversation. Right? So here's the first one. I learned that. I need a few of you all to just share with all of us based on our conversation, particularly a lot of great comments in the chat. So some of the things that I shared with you in the PowerPoint, or I may just said in general, or some of the things that people who have mentioned in the chat. So can I get a few of you all to share, finish this sentence? I learned that. What did you learn the last 40, 50 minutes? All right. Thank you, Deanna. Reflect on our biases, and we all have them, Tracy. We all have them. Doesn't make you a bad person, makes you a human, but we still have to work on them though, right? Implicit biases can be mitigated. Give me a few more. All right, Amanda Wallace. I'm glad you mentioned informed relationships. Use all that the experience and information we get from our students to help us serve those students better. All right, you keep coming in with the next one. Anybody have an epiphany or aha moment? I realized that. I realized that. Anybody want to finish that one? Okay. Informing goes beyond trauma. Okay, thanks, Rebecca. Equity is not equality. All right, a couple more. All right. I was pleased that. Can I get a few of you all to finish that sentence? I was pleased that. What were you pleased about today? I was pleased about the interaction. I can only imagine if this was in person. We've been going on for 2 or 3 hours. I want you all to read Don's chat post. Even if your school doesn't have significant diversity in race, doesn't mean you don't have inequities. Exactly, Don. And that's one of the things that's really hard for people to understand, especially when I go to districts that are not that racially diverse. They don't think I need to be there to talk about equity. And I'm like, yes, for a number of reasons I do. I was pleased that the differences that we have, differences in rural areas, our areas are noticed. Yes, we want all our children. Equity is about all children. Culturally responsive teaching is about all children. You were pleased I would share the slides. Yes, that's right, Ramon. I will share the slides. I'm glad you were pleased about that. That's funny. All right. And the last one, and you can choose whichever you want. I was not aware of. Is there anything we talked about you were not aware of that you may want to go research and investigate a little bit more? All right, thanks, Greg. All right, Kimberly, yes, resources, not all about money. Probably money's probably about 3rd or 4th on the list, really. Okay. Yep. The implicit association test. All right, I'm going to stop sharing because a couple of things I want to share with you all. I was not aware of the preschool study, my ECT teacher needs. All right, and I'm going, let me give you my information. So if you want to reach out to me, if you just got to have the PowerPoint the next day or two, just email me and I'll send it to you. I'm also going to give it to Megan for them to upload. If you have other questions, you can email me. My cell's right there. The conversation doesn't have to stop today. We can continue this conversation as we go. I'll leave it there for another minute, another few seconds, so you can get my information. And then I'm gonna share a couple other things with you, and then I'm gonna leave you alone, okay? All right. Hopefully you have it. Take a picture of it. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing right now. Did I give you enough time? All right, great. All right, first of all, I want to thank you all for spending your time on this topic. It's really important. And anytime I have a chance to talk to educators, particularly those who are in the classroom, or administrators, counselors, school social workers, whatever your role is directly related to the schools, I want to acknowledge that we value what you do every day and recognize what you truly been through in the trenches the last 15, 16 months. And I hope people understand how important you are. A student asked me, and I always share this, a student asked me that, why did I become an educator? And I said, well, I could have became a lawyer and made $100,000, but I became an educator and made 100,000 lawyers. You all have impact every day on children and what they become and what they do. And so we need to value that. The second thing is this, that as we start, school starts, some may have started last week, some are starting this week, some are starting next week, a little later, that make sure you take care of yourselves as much as you take care of your students, all right? And give the world the best of you, not what's left of you. That's important. So you self-care and take care of, because, you know, many educators, we will internalize what our students are going through, which comes out in secondary trauma. So make sure you practice self-care also. And remember that, you know, all you all are leaders. You don't have to be the superintendent of a school district. You don't have to be the director, or you don't have to be a board member. All of you have impact and leadership. And so I always tell people, if you operate within your gift, you don't have to sit at the head of the table, because wherever you sit or stand, the table will shift. All right. I want to thank you all for your time. If you have any questions, comments, give you information, you want the PowerPoint instantly, just give me a shout. And thank you again.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cleveland. This was amazing. We will be posting the whole recording on our website in the next few days where you registered for this webinar. And feel free to reach out to me or Dr. Cleveland for his PowerPoint. And Dr. Cleveland, as always, we are honored to have you. So thank you so much for your time and expertise.
All right. Thank you for the invite.